Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just survive. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband Evan.
Good morning.
We're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Thursday morning.
Yes, thank you for listening, and if you find this episode helpful, please don't forget to pass it along to a friend.
Since it's Thursday, we're talking about being connected, both our connection to God, which is where we get our power from, and our connection to other people, because community is a really important value in Christianity. So we thought we'd talk about how goodness is unpopular.
Yeah, like real goodness. The kind of hard-hitting, kind of in-your-face goodness like we've been talking about all week, that involves things like real honesty and rebuke sometimes.
Yeah, that it's more than niceness. There's kind of an edge to it. Although I was thinking, I feel like we need to put a caveat here. In the Bible, goodness and kindness are almost always paired. So it's not real goodness if you are mean. There's I've been thinking about that because I grew up in a church where it was so focused on goodness that there wasn't a lot of grace or love or kindness. It was just like in your face, da-da-da-da-da kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think we're hypersensitive to call something mean that might not actually be mean, though.
right.
If someone's passionate or even if they're feeling their actual feelings, imagine that.
Right.
And they are angry and they act angry. I mean, we're not instructed to not be angry, but we're instructed in the Bible to not get carried away with our anger and to not get consumed by it.
Right.
So we may see an expression of anger and be like, that person's being really mean. So we need some discernment too about what's really going on. I think we're a little hypersensitive to call something mean, but we don't want to be mean either,
Right. Yeah, we want to be wise in how we're good. Like Jesus talks about that we're gentle as dove and wise as serpents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we ended up talking about kindness, I don't know, a month ago or something, and that's definitely, it does go hand in hand with love and goodness. But we've also made this distinction this week that we're not just talking about niceness. Like that's the thing that may not necessarily be a biblical principle, but our culture lifts it up so much. It's really almost worshipped in our culture.
Right.
You have to be nice. You can't hurt somebody's feelings. Like these are all things that we value so much that if we're going to really be good and kind, we're going to be squashing some of those eggshells.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me when you look at people who have stood up for what's right, biblically what's right. And then, I don't know. But again, I feel like it is kind of that balance scales. Like goodness and kindness have to be perfectly balanced to be able to move forward. And if you're too far on one side or the other side, you're not going to be walking the right road.
Mm-hmm. And another thing too, if we're going to engage in this kind of behavior with our fellows, our fellow human beings, we've got to get over this. Another high value in our culture is this, everybody's kind of divided off into their own little kind of compartment, and we don't cross the line really with other people.
It's like high school.
I guess. What do you mean?
I was just thinking about High School Musical.
Sure. You got all the skaters over here and all the preps over here, and
our daughters and I watched Equestria Girls, which is a My Little Pony thing for our girl night. It was ridiculous. We like watching movies like that and just kind of making fun of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, but they had, that was a big theme in the movie, just like in High School Musical, that each group is broken off and nobody comes together. Like you don't cross lines. The jocks don't talk to the dramas and all that kind of stuff. And we want to be people who unite. Because that's what the Bible calls us to do.
Yeah. When I think even on a more individual level, our culture, there's phrases like, let me live my life, or you do you, or live and let live, where it's this whole idea of like, well, that's Joe and he's just the way he is. I'm not going to mess with it. And heaven forbid anybody mess with me and my stuff and try to like speak into my life at all. Like, how dare you? And that's not a community. Right. That's just a bunch of individuals kind of bumping into each other and trying to get to work on time.
Yeah, it's hard. I was thinking about this because, I've been on both sides of the equation where I've been the person saying, hey, there's a problem. And then it totally didn't work out well. And I've been the person where somebody comes to me and says, hey, there's a problem. And sometimes it works out okay and sometimes it doesn't, And it's not, I was thinking about how in the case of rebuke, like there's a problem arises when two people's issues rub up against each other. So there's always like some issues on my side and some issues on the other person's side. And we both have to deal with our issues, I can't just be like, hey, if you would stop, I don't know, what's a good example?
Of something I need to stop doing.
Sure. Tell me something you need to stop doing.
Cutting my toenails at dinner.
You do not cut your toenails at dinner. But yeah, if I was like, hey, you need to stop cutting your toenails at dinner because cutting toenails in general just makes me feel so sick. It would sick me out if you cut your toenails. Yeah, it would
sick me out too.
But so there's things on both sides of the equation. Mm-hmm. And we want to be wise. I think the idea of rebuke, like we talked about yesterday, there's an underlying assumption that you've done the work of listening first.
Yeah.
Figure out what the problem is and not just jump into, this is what I think it is. But yeah, like there's a need for being honest with somebody because it makes the relationship so much better. Mm-hmm. And you're like, hey, this thing that you're doing, it really hurt me or bothers me or...
I think the reason we don't do that, though, like there's real valid fear there. Like you were just saying, sometimes it doesn't work out right. And there's a lot of unknowns, Right. Is this conversation going to go okay? Or tomorrow, is this conversation, it's going to kill our friendship and I won't have this friendship tomorrow?
Right.
I mean, who knows?
And that can happen. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I think if that happens, there's a lot bigger problems. And that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to. That if you say, hey, there's this problem, and the other person says, no, there's not, you're the problem.
And by the way, I'd never talk to me again.
Yes. Then it's like, wow.
Then there's big problems there.
Right. There must have been a lot of, it's like a jar that has a lot of cracks, and then just that straw that breaks the camel's back completely shatters the jar, and you're like, what happened? Mm-hmm. But it's because there were a lot of problems already inherent in the relationship.
And so that's some of that major discomfort that we're going to push into, because even if we've never done this ever before for 50 years and now we want to try to start doing it, it's going to be a rocky road, but it's still what we're called to do as Christians. Right.
Well, and like we talked about yesterday, people who are Christians who are really following God welcome rebuke. Because honestly, for me, if somebody comes to me and says, here, there's a problem, there is definitely some hurt if they say it in a mean way. If they're not being kind at all, if they're not listening to me, they steamroller into, here's your problem, and they didn't even pay any attention to what I was actually trying to say. Mm-hmm. So there's some hurt there. But most of the time, I can just take it to the Lord and say, is this a problem, God? Show me. And then I take it to the people that I'm closest to that know me best, like you and some of my other girlfriends, and be like, somebody said this. What do you guys think? Is that something you see in my character? And then, between praying about it and processing through it, I can say, oh, that is a major problem, or that's not a problem at all. Often it's somewhere in between.
Right. And to try to see that, because ideally we would, like we said, kind of listen first and try to understand and actually be kind, not just nice.
Right.
So that when the rebuke comes or the confrontation or whatever, it's out of care and it's because I want your life to be better and I want our relationship to be better, so that when we receive it, try to say, well, hopefully they did that too. And this is something I should actually consider.
Right.
And still go through those steps of like prayer and discussion and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and even if they haven't done it, sometimes it's possible that, a third person perspective, like just a different perspective on your life.
The Holy Spirit could still use a careless rebuke to stir up something.
I've had that happen where it's like, okay, that was really mean. And that was not said out of any sense of care for me. But, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to pray about it. And then, I'm going to change what God brings up to me, because he's the final authority on who I am and where I need to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to kind of put some perspective on what it's like to be use this in your life sometimes and to accept it into your life. Like I just, through my experiences, I've, not being an island and actually being connected to other men and to you and people at church, and has allowed me to be a better friend and a better son and sibling and husband and father.
Right.
These things flourish in an environment where goodness is allowed.
Right.
And I've seen that, and it's so important because I know my personality type, and my tendency is to isolate and to be like, well, I can probably figure this out on my own. I don't really need your help. If I can't figure it out, maybe it's not even worth doing in the first place. Just my tendency, I know, is to just be like, me versus the world. I got this. Stop bothering me. And so it's been a real challenge to work on doing things differently, but it's been so much better.
Yeah, I was thinking about how the path of goodness is it's so amazing. And it's God trying to save us from heartbreak, because when we're not in the path of goodness, we're building in all these negative consequences for ourselves. And sometimes, we don't have the vision to see that far down the road to be like, oh, this is what this behavior looks like 10 years from now. And it's just, I don't know, it's just amazing to me that God wants us to have peace and joy and freedom and abundance, and that's why he's like, hey, this is important. Just like, I think it's a verse in Romans where it talks about not fearing the authorities because you follow the rules. Being able to follow the rules, for instance, just in speeding. If you're driving the speed limit, you don't have to worry. It was so funny to me the other day. One of our friends was like, oh, there's always a cop on this road. And we were like, okay, so?
Right.
And it's because they were like, you really need to know in case you're speeding.
Sure.
And it just was a non-issue, it's just nice.
Yeah. But there's still, we still speed sometimes, or we have. Is it enough to make it a reflex to when you see a police car on the side of the road to slow down, no matter what, no matter how fast you're going, it's still this reflex.
I don't have that reflex.
You don't have that anymore?
I don't.
That's
I do look down at my speedometer, but then I'm like, oh, never mind.
Right.
So it means that we don't have those consequences. Like, it gets rid of that, the fear, the stress. Like, it's just, you just drive. It's so nice. And that's what God wants to do when we follow the path of goodness, to be able to just live our lives. And like we were talking about, I think it was on Monday with the railroad tracks, like this idea that there's less friction, it's easier, it takes less energy, and we're going good places.
I think, like we've said today, though, like initially there will be more friction and more stress because we're kind of have to change the way we do relationships, and we have to start getting intentional, and letting God's goodness speak into our lives more. And
it doesn't always turn out well short term.
Nothing in life's guaranteed to turn out well.
Right. But if we're doing it because of the people we want to be, rather than because of how we want somebody else to respond, we'll keep doing the uncomfortable work of saying, this is what goodness looks like. And, have you noticed this in your life? Do you feel like this is an issue? That's another great way to just make sure that you ask questions instead of saying, this is a major issue in your life. I've totally noticed it. Instead, have you noticed that you do X, Y, Z? Do you think that that's a good idea?
Yeah, I think that's something so important. I think we'll get into this tomorrow. We talked about swooping in yesterday and and kind of skipping over some of the things that are important to goodness and just trying to like solve problems, or even just trying to be kind. Right. It's not a long-term plan. And, tomorrow when we talk about complete, we'll talk about not being locked in the past or the future, and just kind of how these things play out over time. We can't just zap things into existence right now. Goodness, like God's goodness, is a eternal commitment to us. It's not just something that he dishes out every once in a while.
All right. Well, hopefully that gives us all some stuff to think about. I know conflict is always something that I am working on because I feel like it's not one of my strong points.
It's hard.
It is hard, but it is good. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for the good things in your life or to look for the bad things in your life. We love you guys, and we're praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this episode helpful, please do share it And come back tomorrow, and we are going to talk about taking the log out of your own eye, and that kindness is not a long-term plan.
Yeah, goodness is, but kindness is not.
All right, guys, have an awesome
Yep,
Thursday.
see ya.